You're listening to The Wrap,
a Warren Averett podcast for business leaders,
designed to help you access vital business information and trends when you need it,
so you can listen, learn, and then get on with your day.
Now, let's get down to business. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of The Wrap.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're on episode 70. This time we're going to be talking about the investment startup stage, and I can't think of anybody else in the firm better to have that discussion with than our friend Yogesh Patel over in Atlanta. It's going to be a pleasure to talk with him and see what he has to say as it relates to the investment startup stage for businesses.
Thanks, Kim. Thanks, Paul. Thanks for having me. Happy to be here today with you guys. So I'm here in Atlanta office. I've been with the firm for 20 years. Spend a lot of my time working with private equity, venture funds, entrepreneurs, founders, and advising them through really the startup journey all the way to exit. So happy to be here today with you guys and look forward to our conversation.
Yeah, we're excited to get started on this. So let's just dive right in. How would you describe the startup investment phase of the business life cycle?
Yeah, so really when you think about it, right, a business initially starts bootstrapped. So you think about Jeff Bezos, Amazon started in his garage, right? So I think that's kind of the infancy stage of a business is to be bootstrapped. And that could mean, self-funded by you're still working a full-time job and still funding your idea through your paycheck. Or maybe you have a partner who's supporting the family while you're off on an endeavor to potentially, execute on an idea that you have that you see a need for or to solve a problem. So I think that's really kind of where, a startup happens, right? In terms of that, I would put startups in two broad categories. Eventually, as you start generating revenue, one would be what I would say a lifestyle or moderate growth business. And the other would be more of a hyper growth business that may, look for capital a lot sooner than, the earlier type that I'd mentioned.
So what challenges come with that, Yogesh? Like, I'm sure that there are some defining characteristics as it relates to investments and that whole phase of starting a business. What are some of those characteristics? What are some of those challenges that people are facing every day?
Yeah, so I think from a startup phase, you really have to think about revenue and profitability first and foremost, right? So there's just a lot of grit and resilience you have to have as a founder to kind of go through that initial phase of starting a business and figuring that out, as far as what does the customer and the market demand, and how do I get to a point where I actually generate my first sale? Part of that is, as a founder, I think it's a crash course in having an MBA at the end of the day, because there's so many different hats that you're wearing. You have to think about, developing the product, selling the product, the resources that you'll need. You don't have a lot of cash, right, when you first start out. So I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges that you face as a founder is just working through all of that together to get to that first sale.
So you just talked about bootstrapped and, there's also venture backed. What's the difference in trying to do a startup bootstrapped or venture backed? I'm sure there's pros and cons to both, right?
There is. So, when you think about bootstrap, I think, there's a lot of benefits. One being you catch mistakes easily. And what I mean by that is you're not funded, right? So you have very little cash to invest. So it allows you to be more focused and more involved in the business, in my opinion, as far as finding mistakes early or finding things that don't work early on. Whereas, if you do have cash in the bank from a venture investment, there may be some time that goes by where you try a strategy and realize that you've burned some cash and not really achieved, what you set out to achieve. So I think that's one of the fundamental differences there as well. One of the things that come to mind, or two things that come to mind, one is ownership, right? That changes drastically. Bootstrap, you are in control. You probably have 100% equity in the business as a bootstrap company, whereas, venture funding, you are giving up some equity and potentially some control. So I think that's another big area where there's a difference between venture funding and bootstrap.
Yogesh, the folks that you deal with or the people that you talk to or the circles you run in, What is that percentage? How many do you see that are bootstrapped versus venture backed? And today, is there hey, you should probably do this if X is what you're thinking about, or you should probably do Y? How do you advise people on which one of those to take?
Yeah, good question. So, I think, as we said before, everybody starts off bootstrapped. It's just a matter of at what point do you go to seek capital? And, we see a lot of PR releases where, company X raised $50 million, or company Y raised a $25 million round. That's not typically normal, I would say, by and large. I think entrepreneurs sometimes might, mistake success being equal to financing. I think really it's more of successes, revenue growth, profitability, margins. When I say that is really you should be ready to seek venture funding, at the right time. And we always suggest to bootstrap your business as much as you can, as long as you can, to really where VCs are chasing you, not you chasing VCs, right? So it's definitely a long journey. And you asked from our client base and clients that we work with, where are they at in that journey? I would say we work with, a good amount who are still looking to get that funding, have a great idea, and have generated some good revenue, but still trying to get to a point where VCs are chasing them. And generally, I'll just throw out a broad range. I would say $3 to $5 million in sales is really what gets attention for institutional capital. And I'll use VCs broadly, right? There's other type of capital out there. There's family offices. There's also seed stage. So you could certainly get a lower size check if you don't have 3 million or plus in revenue. But again, it goes back to what I was saying with just capital in general is giving up ownership, giving up potentially some control in the decision-making process of your business is what you really have to factor.
That makes sense. So you've talked about limited resources. What do startups prioritize, or how should their efforts be prioritized when limited resources are all they have and they haven't gone the VC route, or this is their third or fourth venture, right? I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of folks out there that when you see somebody's got venture backed, it's probably not their first time ever. It's probably number 3, 5, whatever it is. So when you have those limited resources, what are you prioritizing?
Yeah, that's a good question. So again, to me, it goes back to customers and revenue. So when you think about that, you need to have a product, whether it's a product or a service. It doesn't have to be 100% perfect. It doesn't have to have all the bells and whistles. You just need to understand your customer base and figure out, how do I make the sale? What is the level of product or service that allows them to change from whoever they're using as competitors, right? Your competitor, that makes my product just slightly better to get in. And I think where the focus after that really becomes customer feedback, getting involved in your customer community, and building and fine-tuning that product to continue to grow the revenue. There's a book out there called The Mom Test, right? And it really, basically it's a guide to how do you ask questions, how do you understand customers to make sure you're building a product that's going to have high value and solve their problem more than your competitor may be solving the problem today.
So Yogesh, you mentioned just a minute ago that, sometimes it gets viewed as successful if you raise a big amount of money when you might not be focused on the right thing, which is driving up revenue. So how do you advise companies? What are those key performance indicators, those KPIs that you think business owners should focus on in that startup investment phase? And how do you make sure that those align with their long-term goals of what they're trying to accomplish?
Yeah, so really, again, we always work with our clients to say, even if you're not looking to exit a business or raise capital, you should always operate as if you are. So KPIs is a big part of that, in terms of just measuring metrics. So without getting into any industry specifics, I would say you need to have at least 3 to 5 KPIs identified. You don't need 20. You don't need a dashboard full of, a bunch of metrics that, you're probably not going to track half of those anyway. So let's focus on 3 to 5. Key ones being revenue, margin, and maybe a couple of others that are more industry aligned. So for example, tech companies may track churn, how many by cohort, as far as, how many customers are actually they're retaining. There are some metrics that don't really have value. So in my opinion, like gross transaction value is a big number for fintech companies. I'm a fintech company. We've had 50 billion of transactions run through our, platform. Well, if your sales folks are giving up concessions to get to that volume, you can still have flat revenue. So what is that KPI really telling you, right? So I think one of the things about KPIs is just being intentional about what you're tracking. Be honest with yourself as a management team, as a founder, that these are the true metrics, and define them and stick with them. And that'll guide you well in terms of as your business grows.
And it sounds like what we talk about a lot is start with the end in mind, right? Like, what is the goal ultimately at the end? And how is that going to be measured? You need to back into what do you need to be measuring now to make sure that you are where you need to be at the end for when it measures, when it counts, right?
That's right. And, we talked about kind of lifestyle, moderate growth business versus hyper growth business. And those KPIs could differ, right? So in terms of if it is a lifestyle business or a closely held business, you may not want to achieve hyper growth. Your metrics may be, other metrics such as, how you employ your employees, how are you giving back to the community, generating wealth for your family for generations. So it could differ in terms of what those metrics need to be based on, how you're looking. Like you said, with the end in mind, is this a generational business that we're going to pass on, or is this going to be a VC-backed business that's going to have a transaction in the next 3 to 5 years?
Want to receive a monthly newsletter with wrap topics?
Then head on over to warrenaverett.com/the wrap and subscribe to our email list to have it delivered right to your inbox.
Now, back to the show.
So, Yogesh, I'm going to go back to one thing you talked about kind of earlier, which was bootstrapping these companies, and that's own personal money, right? So there's got to be a perspective of, and how do you advise people on separating their personal funding, their personal wealth from the business wealth, right? One, obviously your business wealth hopefully increases your personal wealth, but at some point, those are probably one and the same. And how do people handle that? How do people get around that? What are the challenges related to that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, it's I would say it's not uncommon for founders and entrepreneurs to go all in, right? We work with them, and we know that very optimistic, very high risk tolerance, which is great. I love it because us as accountants are obviously a lot more conservative. So,
right.
Enjoy working with these high growth founders and entrepreneurs who have these large goals. But with that, you also have to think about yourself and your family. It's kind of like when you get on an airplane, what does the flight attendant tell you in the safety? It's put your mask on first and then help others. So I think the financial side of it is part of that as well.
That's a good point.
You don't want to be take on too much risk where it could impact the ability to continue for your personal goals as well. So I think the best thing to do there is just have a financial advisor, right? Where do you sit financially at the present? What are your goals? What is the amount of risk you're willing to take? I think is a really good way to kind of make sure that you're fully aware before you go all in on business. And that may very well impact how much you grow the business bootstrapped. You may say, you know what, I've generated $5 million, $10 million in revenue in this business. I have the opportunity to get a capital partner in and take some chips off the table. Maybe it's the right time for me to do that. Or you may say, I'm going to grow this thing to 25 or $50 million and keep the wealth in this business that I'm going to generate. So really a personal decision, but I think it's something that, to your point, it's a great question that you have to ask yourself as a founder and make sure you're aware of, what kind of risk you're taking.
And as the control guy in this conversation, I mean, separate those two checking accounts, right? Like that's like if you don't do anything else, number one, especially if you're going to have other people in the business, separate the two checking accounts. Don't mix your personal and business. It just makes it really hard at the end of the day. Sorry, yeah, I had to put that in.
No, that's, and I'll add a little bit to that. As a startup, you're very lean, right? I would say you want to do as much as you can. And the accounting side of, we'll talk about the accounting side for a second. You could do all the accounting for the business on your own. Do that as long as you can before you have to pay somebody to do it. But there will come a point in time where you need to put structure and in the finances, especially before you talk to anybody for funding. So, but there's a lot of good community out there, depending on what type of business you're starting up, to get guidance, resources, and things of that nature. So take advantage of that, where you don't spend a lot of money when you're first starting your business.
Good point.
So, I mean, everyone hears about the big success stories, right? The ones that get in the press or movies get made about them. Those are the big stories. But we know with the volume of businesses that are started every year, there are some that have much different stories than that. So maybe you could share an example of a company that experienced some pretty significant challenges or issues or obstacles when they were in this investment startup phase.
Yeah, good question. So, one does come to mind. There's several actually, and there's several because we had this thing called COVID a few years ago, and so we got to see a lot of early stage companies, some who didn't make it, some that did, and kind of how that went. One of the ones that was heavily impacted, that a company that I work with on the tech side, their technology was for an industry that was heavily impacted by COVID. And I'll back up. Prior to that, another important point about bootstrapping and entrepreneurship is, prior to this technology being built, it was a completely different business. It was more of a services business offered that I would say is high volume, low margin. And the entrepreneur was astute enough to pivot. And I think all entrepreneurs pivot at some point, and found another problem that needed to be solved in the industry and went after it. So went after it, built the technology, was going well, and then all of a sudden COVID hits. They were giving significant concessions to their customers because it was the right thing to do. And they made their way through it. Their customers stuck with them during that hard time, and they rebounded quite well and had a very big exit to a strategic buyer shortly after COVID. So I think that's one that comes to mind in terms of just having to pivot early on as an entrepreneur, being able to be honest with yourself about going back to the customer demand. What are the customers telling us? What are they looking? What problem are they looking to solve? And pivoting to that, going through COVID, and then still having a successful exit. So it was amazing journey to kind of be a part of as well.
So Yogesh, we've been talking a lot about the investment stage, and I'm sure that there are, as you're following your KPIs and as you're following what the industry is doing, I'm sure there are indicators that a company is moving kind of away from investment and getting into growth. I think, side note, Kim, I think our next podcast, we're going to be talking to our friend Will Adderhold out of our Birmingham office more about the growth stage of businesses. But what are those indicators that a company should look for and go, you know what, I'm taking that next step. I'm doing what I need to do to move from investment to really growth?
Yeah. So really, it's, you really find a pivotal point in the business, I think, where you think capital is really going to accelerate your growth. And a lot of times what happens is competitors may be entering in at a faster pace, right? Or you can't keep up with competitors. I think that's when you really have to look to see, is this a hurdle I can overcome to continue to grow my business? Or do I need to seek capital and get there faster? Or do I need to seek capital to have access to these customers, right? So I think those are some of the areas that generally have founders think about, okay, it's time to maybe, put the foot on the gas, and now I'm going to take on some capital and really execute in a high growth strategy versus just kind of moving along and having, moderate growth or low growth because I know that competition may outpace me.
And I'm sure it's different for everybody. And I don't mean to ask this question, but somebody's sitting out there, well, how long should I wait? Like, what is that time? What's the point of kind of no return? Hey, I'm in investment. I just can't get to growth. I've been at X amount of years or months. Maybe this doesn't work. Maybe what I thought was a problem being solved, everybody's already solved it, and I don't see that, right? So if you're thinking about the normal company that's going from investment to growth, where's that line where we say, okay, now we're taking that next step? How long usually is that?
Yeah, so that could vary depending on the industry, but I think one of the things that happened during COVID, specifically in the technology sector, I'll share is that very same question that you're asking, Paul, is how much longer can my company continue to grow without stalling? And unfortunately, a lot of companies did stall. And what happened is they either got acquired by another company that could use their technology or service, or they closed shop. So I think in terms of the timing goes, the focus on revenue and growing revenue should be it. And if there comes a point in time where you're just not growing those revenues, whether it's 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, you've got to do a pivot, right? You've got to understand, what am I not solving as an entrepreneur founder in this industry for my customer? Or, what do I need to add or, pivot to get there? Or can I do that?
So something you would say is stop looking at everybody else and focus on your process, right? Because you can't compare you're building a plane to somebody else building a widget. It's not gonna happen. So I think that would be sound advice for them.
Absolutely.
So Yogesh, this has been great conversation. And here on The Wrap, we always try to wrap it up in 60 seconds or less. What one piece of advice would you leave companies with as they are either looking to get into the investment phase and maybe doing a startup, or they think they're in the middle of it? What's the one piece of advice you'd leave them with today?
Yeah. So again, from the top, I would say bootstrap as long as you can. Keep as much equity as you can, right? When it does come time to look for capital, look for smart money. Look for somebody that's got domain expertise in your industry, what you're doing. And again, the goal is for VCs or PEs, wherever stage you're at, to be chasing you, not you chasing them. So I think that would kind of be, my main advice, is to continue to strive for that, the revenue growth and customer value generation. And as you go through that journey, have the right advisors around you. You can't do it alone. Make sure you have the right people on the bus in terms of whether it's an advisory board, whether you're hiring certain advisors, attorneys, accountants, whomever. Make sure you have the right people around you, to go through that with you.
Well, Yogesh, this has been a good discussion, and I hope the listeners out there, found a nugget or something to think about, or maybe I haven't thought about it in that perspective. So we appreciate your expertise in this area, and we appreciate all you do for the clients you serve and the communities that you talk to. So thank you for being with us today. This has been good. Kim, this has been a good one.
Thanks, Yogesh.
Thanks for having me.
And that's a wrap. If you're enjoying the podcast, please leave a review on your streaming platform.
To check out more episodes, subscribe to the podcast series, or make a suggestion of other topics you want to hear.
Visit us at warrenaverett.com/thewrap.